Vanessa Lambert stands at a crossroads, torn between her controlling husband, Nate, and the legacy of her late Uncle Charlie's company, Westridge Innovations. After years of subtle compromises eroding her autonomy, she inherits controlling interest in Westridge, sparking tension with Nate, who demands she sign it over. As Vanessa uncovers Nate's manipulative tactics, undermining her career and targeting Westridge's clients, she finds strength in Charlie's faith in her. Visiting Westridge in Boise, she discovers its potential and her own resolve. But what secrets is Nate hiding, and how far will he go to seize control of her inheritance? If Vanessa's journey of reclaiming her strength resonates with you, join our community. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories of courage and transformation. Your support fuels our storytelling. Click that button and stay tuned for tomorrow's special tale that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. I never imagined I'd find myself standing at such a pivotal crossroads, forced to choose between the man I'd vowed to love and the legacy my uncle entrusted to me. When Nate demanded I hand over my inheritance, he had no clue I'd already begun plotting the future of his precious company. That choice wasn't a spur-of-the-moment rebellion. It was the result of years of quiet sacrifices, each one chipping away at my sense of self until I was nearly unrecognizable. My Uncle Charlie, with his weathered smile and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul, had always preached one truth to me: a woman needs her own means. Nessa, he'd say, his voice warm but firm, never let anyone else hold the reins to your future. As a young woman, I'd nod, thinking I understood, but his words didn't truly sink in until life forced me to feel their weight. They were a lifeline I didn't know I'd need until I was drowning. 7 years ago, I met Nathan Morgan at a charity gala in Seattle, a night that shimmered with possibility. He stood out in the crowded room, tall, commanding, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and ambition. His confidence wasn't just magnetic, it was a force that pulled everyone into his orbit. I was there for my marketing firm, still clawing my way up the corporate ladder, while Nate was already a partner at Morgan Financial Partners, a boutique investment firm that was the talk of the Pacific Northwest. Our first conversation stretched for 3 hours, a whirlwind of ideas about market trends, hidden gem restaurants, and everything in between. Nate had this way of making me feel like the only person in the world, his eyes locked on mine, his laughter warm and genuine. I was hooked, utterly captivated by his charm and drive. 18 months later, we were married in a breathtaking ceremony at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. My parents glowed with pride, their daughter having snagged a man from a good family with a bright future. They never said it outright, but I saw it in their eyes in the way they introduced him to relatives. This is Nathan, Vanessa's husband. He runs his own financial firm. To them, I'd hit the jackpot. The first 3 years of our marriage felt like a dream. We moved into a sleek, high-rise condo in downtown Seattle, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Elliott Bay. I thrived in my marketing career while Nate's business grew steadily. We jetted off to Europe twice a year, dined at Michelin star restaurants, and started sketching out plans for a family. Life felt like a glossy magazine spread, perfect, polished, enviable. But beneath the surface, the first cracks were forming, so subtle I barely noticed them at first. It started with a conversation about a vacation property. I suggested a cozy cabin near Lake Chelan, a place woven into my childhood memories with Uncle Charlie. The idea lit me up, but Nate dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "That's not the kind of property we should invest in, Nessa," he said, his tone clipped. "We need something that matches our status. Aspen, maybe the Hamptons." I tried to explain how much Lake Chelan meant to me, the summers spent fishing with my uncle, the quiet moments that shaped me. But he cut me off. Sentimentality is a lousy investment strategy. That night I let it slide, telling myself it wasn't worth fighting over a hypothetical cabin. But looking back, that moment was a quiet earthquake. It was the first time I saw it clearly. Nate valued appearances over meaning, status over heart. The pattern grew from there, each instance small but sharp, like 1,000 paper cuts. My choice of interior designer was overruled in favor of one recommended by Nate's mother, Eleanor, whose taste leaned toward cold opulence. My dream of hosting laid-back dinner parties with friends was replaced by stiff, formal gatherings for Nate's business associates, where I felt more like a prop than a partner. My career, once a source of pride and identity, became something Nate subtly chipped away at. "You work so hard for so little," he'd say, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe it's time to scale back. We don't need the money." His suggestions always came wrapped in concern, but the message was clear. My ambitions were inconvenient to the life he envisioned for us. Then came the fights about money. Despite my comfortable salary and his wealth, Nate insisted on tracking every cent I spent. If I questioned his business expenses, lavish client dinners, private jet rentals, he'd turn to ice. "I handle the finances in this marriage, Vanessa," he'd say, his voice low and dangerous. "This is my profession. Trust my judgment." The worst part? I started to doubt myself. Maybe he was right. He was the financial expert after all. Maybe my insistence on independence was just stubbornness. Our arguments followed a predictable script. Nate would make a decision without consulting me. I'd push back, and he'd retreat into silence, working late for days, leaving our condo feeling like a mausoleum. The quiet was suffocating, and eventually I'd apologize. Not because I believed I was wrong, but because I couldn't bear the emptiness. Then, like clockwork, the charming Nate would return, armed with flowers or a weekend getaway, reminding me of the man I'd fallen for. For a while, everything would feel perfect again, and I'd convince myself I'd overreacted. Uncle Charlie saw through it all. During one of our rare lunches, meetings Nate subtly discouraged because Charlie's eccentricity didn't fit his polished world. My uncle watched me with eyes full of concern. "You don't smile like you used to, Nessa," he said, his voice soft but piercing. "What's happened to my firecracker of a niece?" I brushed it off, blaming work stress, but Charlie wasn't fooled. As we parted, he squeezed my hand and said, "Remember who you are. I've seen too many bright flames dimmed by the wrong partners." His words lingered, but I didn't fully grasp their weight until it was too late. 3 weeks later, Uncle Charlie was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack. The loss hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me grieving and adrift. Nate was supportive in all the outward ways, arranging the funeral, greeting mourners with practiced solemnity, holding my hand during the service. But that night, when I collapsed in our bedroom, sobbing for the man who'd been like a second father, Nate's response was a clumsy pat on my shoulder. "You need to pull yourself together, Vanessa," he said, his tone more irritated than comforting. "The Hadleys will be at the memorial reception tomorrow. We need to present a united front." In that moment, something inside me shifted, hardened. I realized I was married to a man who saw even my grief as a performance to be managed, a box to check for the sake of appearances. 2 months later, I sat in Uncle Charlie's attorney's office, expecting a small keepsake, maybe his collection of first edition books or the antique desk I'd always loved. Instead, Mr. Daniels dropped a bombshell. Charlie had left me controlling interest in Westridge Innovations, the tech manufacturing company he'd built from nothing over 4 decades. "The shares are yours alone, not marital property," Mr. Daniels emphasized, handing me a letter from Charlie. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dear Nessa," it began, "if you're reading this, I've run out of clever comebacks. Don't be sad too long. I've had a good run. I'm leaving you Westridge because you have the vision and heart to lead it. I've watched you navigate the corporate world with integrity and intelligence, treating everyone with respect, no matter their station. Westridge employs over 200 people in Boise, and they're counting on you to lead wisely. The company is stable but needs fresh ideas to grow. You'll find my notes in the blue folder in my office safe. One last thing, this company is yours, not your husband's, not your parents', not anyone else's to control. I've ensured that legally. Trust yourself, Nessa. Your instincts are better than you know. All my love, Charlie." Tears streamed down my face as I read, each word a reminder of the woman I'd been before Nate's influence dulled my edges. Charlie had seen something in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. Mr. Daniels added that Charlie had updated his will just 3 weeks before his death, right after our last lunch, when he'd looked at me with such worry. He'd known something was wrong and had moved to protect me. "The company is doing well," Mr. Daniels continued, "but the management team will need your guidance on strategic decisions." My mind raced with possibilities. a spark of excitement igniting for the first time in years. That spark dimmed the moment I told Nate about the inheritance. We were at home, sharing a quiet dinner of seafood linguine, a bottle of Pouilly Fumé from our last trip to France open between us. I'd hoped the setting would soften the conversation, but Nate's reaction was immediate and calculating. Westridge Innovations, he mused, setting down his fork. Charlie's manufacturing outfit in Boise. This could be an opportunity. He launched into a plan to absorb Westridge into his holding company, talking about tax advantages and leveraging manufacturing channels for his clients' ventures. His excitement wasn't for me or Charlie's legacy. It was for what he could gain. Charlie left it to me, Nate, I said, my voice steady despite the sinking feeling in my chest. Not to us. Specifically to me. He looked up, a mix of amusement and condescension in his eyes. We're married, Nessa. What's yours is mine, right? When I explained that Charlie had structured it as a non-marital asset, his expression hardened. Don't be difficult, he snapped. You don't know the first thing about running a company. I've been in corporate marketing for 10 years, I countered. I understand strategy, branding, expansion. He cut me off. Playing with ad campaigns isn't real business, Vanessa. This is what I do. I build and manage companies. His dismissal of Charlie, a sentimental old man who didn't understand modern business, cut deep. I'm not signing anything yet, I said firmly. I need time to understand what I've inherited. His voice turned cold. You're going to sign it over to our holding corporation, and we'll handle it. This isn't a discussion. But it was. For the first time, I held my ground, my voice calm but unyielding. It's a discussion, and I'm not deciding tonight. Nate stormed out, leaving me alone with a half-eaten dinner and a growing resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I reread Charlie's letter, his faith in me, a lifeline. At 3 a.m., I slipped into my shrinking home office and dove into research on Westridge. The company was more sophisticated than I'd realized, specializing in custom hardware solutions with an impressive client list. The employee page showed smiling faces at picnics and volunteer events. Real people with lives and dreams, not just assets for Nate's empire. By dawn, I knew I had to see Westridge for myself. I booked a flight to Boise, telling Nate it was a fact-finding mission. He grudgingly agreed, but the morning of my trip, he handed me a manila envelope. Just some standard paperwork, he said casually. Power of attorney and transfer documents to start the integration. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. I'll review it when I'm back, I said. He pressed, but I held firm. I'm not signing anything until I understand what I'm dealing with. That's just good business, right? For a moment, surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked by his professional smile. Of course, have a good trip, honey. As my plane lifted off from SeaTac, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was acting on my own terms. Charlie's words echoed, trust yourself, Nessa. I pulled out my notebook and began listing questions for Westridge's team, my mind buzzing with possibility. I didn't know it then, but this trip would unravel everything. My marriage, Nate's business, and the woman I'd lost along the way. When I landed in Boise driving a modest rental SUV, I felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was the new owner of Westridge Innovations, ready to honor Charlie's legacy and reclaim my own strength. The air in Boise carried a crisp edge, a reminder of the mountains looming in the distance. Westridge Innovations headquarters sat on the fringes of the city, tucked into an industrial park where unassuming single-story buildings stretched across the landscape. The company's logo, a sleek but modest design, marked the entrance with a quiet confidence. The parking lot, about 3/4 full, buzzed with the hum of employees' lives, cars neatly lined up, a few visitor spaces near the entrance standing empty. I eased my rental car into one, pausing to glance at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My navy blazer, paired with a simple blouse and tailored pants, felt like a deliberate choice, a balance of professionalism and authenticity. These weren't the flashy designer labels Nate always insisted I wear to his high-stakes business dinners, the ones that made me feel like a polished prop. No, this outfit was mine, a reflection of the woman I was trying to rediscover. Stepping out, I smoothed my blazer and took a steadying breath. The weight of the day pressed against my chest, but I pushed it aside. Inside, the reception area was warm, almost cozy despite its corporate sheen. A middle-aged woman with kind, crinkled eyes looked up from her computer, her smile softening the sterile edges of the space. "Welcome to Westridge Innovations. How can I help you today?" Her voice was gentle, like she'd spent years perfecting the art of putting people at ease. "I'm Vanessa Lambert," I said, surprised by the calm in my voice. It didn't betray the storm of emotions swirling inside. Grief for Uncle Charlie, uncertainty about what I was walking into, and a flicker of defiance against Nate Thaw's expectations. "I'm Charlie Lambert's niece." Her face lit up, a mix of warmth and sorrow flashing across her features. "Miss Lambert, we've been expecting you." She stood, extending a hand with a sincerity that caught me off guard. "I'm Margaret Wilkins. I was your uncle's administrative assistant for 15 years. Please call me Vanessa or Nessa," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm but comforting, like she was anchoring me in this unfamiliar world. "Uncle Charlie talked about you all the time. He said you were the real force keeping this place running." Margaret's eyes glistened and she let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Oh, your uncle was far too kind. He had a way of making everyone feel indispensable." She paused, her expression faltering as grief crept in. "We're all still trying to wrap our heads around his loss. It's been difficult." She blinked rapidly, composing herself, then pressed a button on her desk phone. "Martin, Miss Lambert has arrived. Shall I bring her to the conference room?" As we walked down a hallway lined with framed patents and company milestones, I felt the weight of Westridge's history. Employees glanced up from their desks, their curiosity tempered by polite smiles or subtle nods. I wondered what they saw in me, Charlie's niece, an outsider, or maybe someone who held a piece of their future in my hands. The thought was both humbling and unnerving. The conference room was already alive with quiet tension when we arrived. 5 people stood as I entered. 3 men and 2 women, their ages and demeanors varied but united by a shared apprehension. Their eyes locked onto me, searching for clues about who I was and what I might mean for their world. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped forward, his presence commanding but not overbearing. "Ms. Lambert, I'm Martin Reeves, COO of Westridge. Charlie spoke so highly of you. On behalf of the executive team, please accept our deepest condolences." His words were formal, but there was a sincerity in his tone that eased some of my nerves. After introductions to the rest of the team, the CFO, CTO, HR director, and sales director, we settled around the polished conference table. For the next 2 hours, they guided me through a detailed overview of Westridge's past, present, and potential future. I scribbled notes furiously, my mind racing to absorb the flood of information. Their presentations were clear and candid, revealing a company that was financially stable but standing at a pivotal moment. The traditional manufacturing side was reliable, a steady engine, but it wasn't growing. The real potential lay in their custom tech solutions, a niche where Westridge's expertise could shine if only they could secure the investment to scale it. Sanjay Patel, the CTO, spoke with a quiet passion that drew me in. A brilliant engineer in his 40s, he'd been with Westridge for over a decade, and his pride in the company was palpable. "Your uncle was starting to steer us toward this new direction," he said, his dark eyes meeting mine. "He saw how our specialized knowledge could solve problems in emerging markets. It was his vision to make Westridge a leader in innovation, not just a manufacturer." I nodded, scribbling down his words, but my mind wandered to Uncle Charlie. He'd always had a knack for seeing potential where others saw obstacles. Had he seen that in me too? The thought lingered, heavy with responsibility. As the meeting wrapped up, Martin hesitated, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "If you don't mind my asking, Lambert, what are your plans for Westridge?" 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, their expressions a mix of hope, fear, and guarded curiosity. These weren't just executives. They were people who'd poured years, even decades, into building this company alongside my uncle. Their careers, their families' futures, were tied to what I do next. I swallowed, choosing my words carefully. "I'm still learning," I admitted, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "Uncle Charlie left Westridge to me for a reason, and I want to honor that. I can promise you this, I won't make any big decisions until I fully understand what they'd mean for the company and everyone who works here. A subtle shift rippled through the room, like a collective exhale. Martin's shoulders relaxed slightly, and Sanjay's lips curved into a faint smile. These people weren't just employees. They were Uncle Charlie's extended family, and now, tentatively, they were beginning to see me as part of it. Charlie always said you had good judgment, Martin said, his tone warm with approval. We'll support whatever path you choose. After the meeting, Sanjay offered to show me around the facility. As we moved through the production floor, research labs, and engineering departments, I was struck by the quiet pride radiating from the employees. They greeted Sanjay with easy respect, their interactions laced with camaraderie. When they looked at me, their curiosity was polite but genuine, as if they were trying to reconcile the niece Charlie had spoken of with the woman standing before them. In the fabrication area, I paused to watch a technician meticulously assembling a delicate component. Sanjay leaned in, his voice low but filled with pride. That's a custom sensor array for a medical device company. Each one is handcrafted. Our precision is why clients choose us over bigger manufacturers. We build components that can't fail, life-critical systems. Life-critical systems, I echoed softly, the phrase stirring a memory of Uncle Charlie using those same words during one of our long talks. Sanjay's eyes lit up, pleased by my recognition. Exactly. Not everything we make is for medical devices, but we approach every project with that level of care. As the tour continued, Sanjay hesitated before leading me to a door marked R&D Lab B. There's one more thing you might want to see, he said almost shyly. It's not part of the official tour. Inside, the room buzzed with creative chaos. Workbenches cluttered with prototypes, walls covered in technical drawings and sticky notes, whiteboards scrawled with equations and sketches. This was Charlie's special project space, Sanjay explained, his voice softening. He gave select engineers time to experiment here, no matter how impractical the ideas seemed at first. I moved through the room slowly, my fingers hovering over the artifacts of innovation without touching them. This was where Westridge's heart beat, where ideas took shape and became reality. This is where innovation happens, I murmured, more to myself than to Sanjay. Exactly, he said, his voice warm with agreement. Most of our breakthrough products started as experiments in this room. He paused, then added, Your uncle had his own workspace here. Would you like to see it? In the corner sat a simple desk, its surface cluttered with a computer, technical manuals, industry journals, and unexpectedly a few philosophy books. My breath caught when I saw two framed photos. One showed a young Uncle Charlie with his arm around my mother, both of them laughing in a way I'd never seen her. The other was of me at my college graduation, my smile bright but my eyes tinged with the uncertainty of youth. My throat tightened. I had no idea he kept these here. He was so proud of you, Sanjay said quietly. He talked about your marketing insights all the time, how you had a gift for understanding people, what drives them. I ran my fingers lightly over the desk, feeling a connection to Uncle Charlie that I hadn't felt since his funeral. Grief welled up, but so did gratitude. Thank you for showing me this, I said, my voice thick with emotion. After the tour, I met with the HR director to dive into the company's culture, benefits, and employee concerns. By the time I left Westridge, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink. Instead of heading to my hotel, I drove to the Bluebird Cafe, a small diner Uncle Charlie had taken me to on past visits. The checkered tablecloths, vinyl booths, and the warm scent of homemade pie were exactly as I remembered. I slid into a booth by the window, ordering coffee and a slice of huckleberry pie. As I waited, I reviewed my notes, trying to make sense of the day. Westridge was more than I'd expected, not just a manufacturer, but a hub of specialized innovation. When the waitress set down my pie, served on a familiar blue willow plate like the ones in Uncle Charlie's cabin, I couldn't help but smile, another thread tying me to him. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. 6 missed calls from Nate, along with a string of texts growing sharper with each unanswered message. Called the office. They said your meeting ended hours ago. Why aren't you answering? I need to know how things went before my meeting with Derek tomorrow. Vanessa, this is unprofessional. Call me immediately. I set the phone down, untouched. and took a bite of pie. The sweet tart burst of huckleberries flooded me with memories of hiking with Uncle Charlie, his patient lessons about wild plants, and the quiet pride in his voice when he talked about his work. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I wasn't making decisions to appease Nate or avoid his disapproval. I was choosing for myself. Back at my hotel, I called Nate. He answered on the first ring, his voice dripping with irritation. "Finally, I've been trying to reach you all day." "I was in meetings," I said calmly, refusing to let his tone pull me into defensiveness. And then I took some time to process everything. "Well, what's the verdict? What are we working with?" His impatience was palpable, already assuming control over the situation. I chose my words with care. "Westridge is impressive, Nate. They have proprietary technology, a dedicated team, and strong client relationships. The financials are solid." "Excellent, Bow," he said, his tone shifting to one of calculated enthusiasm. "This is better than we thought. I've already talked to our attorneys about integrating them into our structure." "I haven't made any decisions yet," I reminded him, my voice firm. "I'm still learning about the company." "Don't overthink this, Nessa," he said, his condescension creeping in. "The longer we wait, the more value we lose. Just sign the documents I gave you and scan them to me tomorrow." "I'm not signing anything yet," I said, my resolve hardening. "This is Uncle Charlie's legacy. I owe it to him to understand it fully before making changes." A long silence followed, heavy with tension. When Nate spoke again, his voice was tight, barely concealing his anger. "Your sentimentality is getting in the way of good business. This isn't about your uncle anymore. It's about maximizing an unexpected asset." "It's not just an asset," I countered, my voice rising with a conviction. "It's 200 people's livelihoods." "People adapt," he said dismissively. "Business evolves. That's how it works." I thought of Margaret's quiet loyalty, Sanjay's passion for innovation, and the pride I'd seen on the production floor. "I need more time." "Time for what exactly? To play business owner?" His tone was laced with mockery. "Vanessa, be realistic. You have no experience running a company." His words stung, but they also ignited something in me. Maybe it's time I gained that experience. "What are you saying?" His voice took on a dangerous edge. "I'm saying I'm considering taking an active role in Westridge's management." The silence that followed was deafening. When Nate finally spoke, his voice was cold and controlled. "I see. Well, it sounds like you need time to come to your senses. We'll discuss this when you return to Seattle." He hung up without another word. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. I just stood up to Nate in a way I never had in 7 years of marriage. Instead of fear or guilt, I felt a quiet resolve. Uncle Charlie had trusted me with this, and for the first time in years, I was trusting myself. The next morning, I met with Mr. Daniels, Uncle Charlie's attorney, in his modest Boise office. The space was a far cry from the sleek skyscrapers of Nate's legal team, but its warmth put me at ease. Mr. Daniels, a thoughtful man in his 60s, spoke with a deliberate calm that inspired confidence. He walked me through my inheritance with meticulous detail. "Your uncle was very specific," he said. "The controlling interest in Westridge was transferred to you personally, not your marital estate. In Idaho, inheritances are generally separate property, unless commingled with marital assets." "What does that mean practically?" Misiki said, leaning forward. "It means Westridge is yours alone, unless you choose to transfer shares to joint on ownership or use company funds for marital expenses." He adjusted his glasses, his expression serious. "Charlie was adamant about this. He added protections that would be difficult to challenge." I nodded, thinking of the letter Uncle Charlie had left me, hinting at his vision for the company. He mentioned notes about Westridge's future. "Do you know anything about those?" Mr. Daniels reached into his desk and pulled out a blue folder. "He left this for you." Inside was a detailed 5-year strategic plan outlining a shift toward custom technology solutions and away from generic manufacturing. Charlie had identified emerging markets, potential partnerships, and even acquisition targets. Handwritten notes in the margins offered insights into key employees, clients, and pitfalls to avoid. This wasn't just a business plan, it was a roadmap tailored for me, blending strategy with human understanding. He spent months on this, Mr. Daniel said softly. After his last checkup, when his doctor found heart irregularities, he became focused on ensuring Westridge's future. I traced Charlie's handwriting, my chest tightening. He never told me about his heart. He didn't want to worry you. Mr. Daniels paused, his gaze steady. Ms. Lambert, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Charlie was concerned about more than his health. He was concerned about you. I looked up, startled. What do you mean? The legal protections around your inheritance weren't standard. When I asked why they were necessary, he said something I'll never forget. I need to make sure Nessa has something that's truly hers, something no one can take from her or convince her to give away. The words hit me like a wave, exposing the truth I'd been avoiding. Uncle Charlie had seen how I'd slowly lost myself in my marriage, how Nate's influence had eroded my independence. This inheritance wasn't just a company, it was a lifeline. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. There's something else, Mr. Daniel said, pulling another document from his drawer. Charlie set up a trust to provide you with a personal income separate from Westridge's profits. He wanted you to have financial independence, no matter what you decide about the company. I exhaled, overwhelmed. He thought of everything. Charlie was a planner, Mr. Daniel said with a sad smile, and he cared deeply about you. After the meeting, I wandered through downtown Boise, the blue folder clutched tightly in my hand. The city's relaxed energy was a stark contrast to Seattle's relentless pace. I found a quiet coffee shop and settled at a corner table, diving into Charlie's notes. The more I read, the clearer it became. Westridge was poised for growth, but it needed strategic marketing to elevate its innovations. Marketing, my expertise. I thought about Nate's plan to absorb Westridge, likely dismantling it for parts. How many of those 200 employees would lose their jobs? How much of Charlie's vision would survive? My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. Derek and I had a productive meeting about Westridge integration, sending revised paperwork to sign. Critical, this moved forward quickly. I ignored it, opening my laptop instead. For the next 3 hours, I drafted a marketing strategy for Westridge, building on Charlie's vision, but infusing it with my own ideas. It was the most inspired I'd felt in years, a plan that could transform Westridge into an industry leader. I was so absorbed that I nearly missed my phone ringing. It wasn't Nate, but Zoe Chen, a colleague from my Seattle office. Zoe was brilliant, fearless, and one of the few people unfazed by Nate's presence. Nessa, it's Zoe, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Zoe, hi, everything okay? Not exactly. Things are weird here. Your husband showed up at the office today looking for you. I frowned. Nate was there? Why? He said he needed files from your computer for a joint business project you were working on. Something about a company you inherited. When he asked me to give him access, he got pushy. A chill ran through me. What happened? I held my ground, Zoe said, a hint of defiance in her voice. I told him I couldn't give him access to your computer without your permission. Company policy strictly prohibited granting access to another employee's workstation, no matter the personal connection. That was the rule Zoe had to enforce when Nate showed up at the office, his charm dialed up, his smile tight but insistent. He'd wanted to poke around my computer, claiming it was for some vague, urgent reason tied to our shared life. Zoe, ever the professional, held her ground, but she told me later how his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed frustration before he stormed out. He wasn't happy, she said over the phone, her voice laced with concern, as if she could sense the storm brewing in my world. My mind spun, a whirlwind of questions and half-formed fears. What could Nate possibly need from my work computer? What files did he think were so critical that he'd bypass me entirely? I tried to keep my voice steady as I thanked Zoe, but inside my thoughts were racing, chasing shadows of doubt I hadn't dared to face before. That's not all, Zoe added, her tone dropping to a cautious whisper. After he left, I'd flagged an attempt to access your email remotely. Someone tried to get in, Nessa. It was about an hour after he walked out. A cold knot tightened in my chest, spreading like frost through my veins. Nate had tried to hack into my work email. The realization hit like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. What was he looking for? What did he think I was hiding? The implications were overwhelming, each one a jagged piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Was he after something specific? Emails, documents, secrets? Or was this about control, about keeping tabs on a part of my life he couldn't touch? I pressed the phone closer to my ear, forcing my voice to stay calm. Thanks for letting me know, Zoe. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having my back. Of course, she said, pausing for a beat. Nessa, is everything okay? You know you can talk to me if you need to. Her words were gentle, an invitation to unburden myself, and for a fleeting moment, I was tempted. I wanted to spill everything, the growing unease about Nate's behavior, the suffocating realization that my marriage wasn't the partnership I'd once believed it to be, but a carefully orchestrated cage of control. I wanted to tell her about Westridge, about the inheritance that had become a battleground, about the way Nate's charm had morphed into something colder, more calculated. But I wasn't ready to voice those truths, not yet. The words felt too heavy, too final. I'm figuring some things out, I said, at last, my voice softer than I intended. But knowing I have friends like you means more than you know. After we hung up, I sat frozen, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. My thoughts churned, circling back to Nate's actions. Why go to such lengths? What was he so desperate to find? The only answer that made sense was Westridge. He must have been searching for something tied to the company, maybe correspondence with Mr. Daniels, my uncle's lawyer, or notes about the inheritance itself. But why? What was he afraid of? The truth hit me with a clarity that stole my breath. Nate was terrified I might actually take control of Westridge. He was afraid I'd step out of the role he'd crafted for me, the supportive, compliant wife who never questioned his lead. The thought was both chilling and strangely empowering. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling slightly, and gathered my things. There was one place I needed to go before I could make any decisions. Uncle Charlie's cabin sat on 3 acres just beyond the city limits, tucked among towering ponderosa pines with a view of the rolling foothills. As a teenager, I'd spent summers there hiking trails with Charlie, learning to cast a fishing line in the nearby stream, and sitting on the porch as he spun stories about my mother's childhood, his eyes crinkling with warmth. The key was still hidden under the stone turtle sculpture by the front steps, exactly where it had always been. Stepping inside, I was enveloped by the familiar scent of aged wood and the faint, lingering trace of Charlie's pipe tobacco. The cabin was a time capsule. Mismatched furniture that somehow felt cozy, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stuffed with well-worn novels, and a mantel adorned with an eclectic collection of rocks and pine cones. I moved through the space slowly, my fingers brushing over surfaces that held memories of a simpler, braver version of myself. In the small study off the living room, Charlie's desk stood as he'd left it, neat and orderly, his reading glasses resting precisely where he'd placed them last. Above the desk, a corkboard held a patchwork of photographs, Charlie with his parents, with my mother, with friends and colleagues from years gone by. At the center was a picture of me at 16, my face lit with laughter as I fumbled with a fishing hook, Charlie watching with a grin that radiated pride. The image brought a lump to my throat. I sank into his desk chair, the leather creaking softly, and opened the top drawer. Inside, among neatly arranged pens and paper clips, was a small leather notebook. I flipped through it, discovering a journal of sorts, brief notes about the world outside, ideas for quirky inventions, and occasional glimpses into Charlie's heart. One entry stopped me cold, dated from our last lunch together. Lunch with Nessa today. She's lost something vital, that spark, that fire. She chooses her words so carefully now, always glancing over her shoulder, as if she's afraid of saying the wrong thing. This isn't the niece I know. Her husband has slowly caged her spirit. She doesn't see it yet, but I do. I need to find a way to help her remember who she is. Tears spilled onto the page, blurring the ink. Charlie had seen it, the slow erosion of my confidence, the way Nate's influence had dimmed the woman I used to be. I'd been blind to it, or maybe I'd chosen not to see, but Charlie had known. He'd seen the truth I was only now beginning to grasp. I closed the journal, my hands shaking, and returned it to the drawer. As I wiped my eyes, my gaze caught on a framed quote on the wall, one I'd overlooked in my youth. "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself aloud." Coco Chanel. The words hit me like a call to arms. Sitting there, surrounded by memories of a time when I was fearless, unapologetically myself, I made my decision. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls in quick succession. First, to Martin Reeves at Westridge, requesting an urgent meeting with the executive team the next morning. Second, to Mr. Daniels, asking him to prepare specific documents and join me at the meeting. Third, to Zoe, with a proposition that left her momentarily speechless before she agreed with infectious enthusiasm. I didn't call Nate, instead I sent a curt text. "Still in Boise, need more time to evaluate Westridge. We'll be in touch when I have a clearer picture." His reply was instant, sharp with command. "This isn't a request, Vanessa. Sign the documents and come home." I turned off my phone, a quiet act of rebellion that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in our marriage, I was defying Nate's orders. That night, I slept in the cabin's spare bedroom, the silence of the woods wrapping around me like a balm. The distant hoot of an owl punctuated the quiet, and for the first time in years, I slept without the low hum of anxiety that had become my constant companion in Seattle. Morning brought a clarity I hadn't felt in ages. I showered, dressed in a sleek pantsuit I'd bought in Boise, simple but elegant, a reflection of the woman I was reclaiming, and drove to Westridge. The executive team was already in the conference room, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild concern. Mr. Daniels arrived shortly after, a stack of legal documents in hand. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "I've spent the last few days diving into Westridge, its history, its strengths, and its potential. I've also studied Uncle Charlie's vision for the company's future. I passed out copies of a strategy document I'd crafted the day before, my marketing expertise woven with Charlie's notes. This is a preliminary plan. I want your honest feedback." For the next hour, we dissected the proposal. The team asked sharp questions, offered thoughtful suggestions, and raised valid concerns. Even Howard Parker, the skeptical CFO, admitted, albeit grudgingly, that the marketing strategy could potentially double high-margin business within 2 years. "This is promising," Martin said, leaning back in his chair. "But I'm curious about execution. Are you planning to hire a marketing director to drive this?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my next words settling over me. "Actually, I'd like to take a direct role in Westridge's operations, focusing on marketing and business development." A murmur rippled through the room. Howard's eyebrows shot up. "You're proposing to work here, in Boise?" "Not exclusively at first," I clarified. "I'd split my time between Seattle and Boise while we build a marketing team." I glanced at my watch. In fact, my first candidate should be calling in now. Right on cue, Margaret appeared at the door. "Ms. Lambert, Zoe Chen is on the conference line." We patched her in, and Zoe's confident voice filled the room. She introduced herself, outlined her expertise in digital marketing, and launched into a sharp analysis of Westridge's online presence and brand positioning. Her insights were incisive, her grasp of the industry impressive, and by the time she finished, the team was nodding, clearly taken with her. After the call, Sanjay spoke up. "I think your uncle would approve of this direction, Miss Lambert." Martin nodded. "Charlie always said Westridge needed to tell its story better. He just didn't know how." Howard, ever the pragmatist, raised concerns about budgets and reporting structures, but I addressed them calmly. "I'm not suggesting we overhaul everything overnight. I'm asking for your support to start laying the groundwork." One by one they agreed, even Howard, though he insisted on rigorous financial oversight. Then I turned to Mr. Daniels. He produced a document from his briefcase. "Ms. Lambert has asked me to prepare a declaration of intent regarding Westridge's ownership," he explained. "It states that she has no intention of transferring ownership or control to any other party, and that any transfer documents not personally signed by her in my presence are invalid." I signed the document, and Daniels notarized it on the spot. Martin frowned. "This necessary?" "It's a precaution," I said carefully. "There have been misunderstandings about my intentions. I want to be crystal clear. The meeting ended, and I felt a heady mix of triumph and trepidation. I'd set something in motion that would change everything, something that would inevitably pit me against Nate. As I prepared to leave, Margaret caught me in the parking lot. "Nessa," she said with a warm smile, "Charlie would be proud. He always said you had fire in you." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. That means the world." On the drive back to the cabin, I turned my phone on. 17 missed calls from Nate, along with a barrage of texts, each one angrier than the last. The most recent read, "Since you won't answer my calls, I'm coming to Boise. Flight lands at 8 p.m. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'd known this was coming, but not so soon. Nate was coming to reassert control, to bend me back into the shape he wanted. But this time I was ready to stand my ground. As the sun dipped below the mountains, I sat on the cabin's porch swing, watching the sky blaze with color, blue fading to orange, then deepening to purple. In a few hours, I'd face the hardest confrontation of my marriage. But for now, I let the peace of the moment settle over me, drawing strength from the beauty of the landscape and the memory of Uncle Charlie, who had believed in me even when I'd lost faith in myself. "I won't let you down, Uncle Charlie," I whispered into the twilight. "Not this time." I spent the hours before Nate's arrival steeling myself for what was to come. This wouldn't be like our usual arguments, where I'd back down to keep the peace. This was about my right to choose my own path, not just for Westridge, but for myself. I drove to the Boise airport, arriving just as his flight landed, determined not to give him the upper hand. I spotted him in the arrivals area, his tailored suit immaculate despite the late hour, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Vanessa," he said, his voice taut as he approached. "What's going on? I've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been busy," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Let's talk in the car." The drive to the cabin was thick with tension. Nate alternated between forced small talk and pointed questions about Westridge, each one probing for a crack in my resolve. I kept my answers vague, sensing his frustration building. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult," he finally snapped. "This is a straightforward business decision. The longer you delay, the more value we're losing." "It's not we, I hope." Nate guided wisely. "Westridge is my inheritance, not yours." He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. "You can't be serious. We're married. Your assets are our assets." "Not in this case," I said, my eyes fixed on the road. "Uncle Charlie structured the inheritance to remain separate property." Nate laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "And you think that matters? Any decent attorney can work around that. This isn't about legalities. It's about what's best for our future." I didn't respond, turning onto the gravel drive to the cabin. Nate took in the rustic structure with visible disdain. "This is where we're staying? There must be hotels in Boise." "This was Uncle Charlie's cabin," I said simply. "I'm comfortable here." Inside, Nate prowled the living room, his eyes sweeping over the modest furnishings with barely hidden contempt. "So this is where you've been hiding, playing pioneer while ignoring your responsibilities in Seattle?" "I haven't been hiding," I said, hanging my jacket by the door. "I've been learning about the company I've inherited and making decisions about its future." "And what decisions have you made?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. I met his gaze head on. "I'm not selling or transferring Westridge, Nate. I'm going to run it myself." The silence was deafening. Nate stared at me as if I'd just declared I was moving to the moon. "That's absurd," he said finally. "You have no experience running a manufacturing company." "I have a decade of marketing experience and a deep understanding of brand positioning," I countered. "The operational side is handled by an executive team that worked with Uncle Charlie for years." "This is about sentimentality, not business," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." "Actually, I've been incredibly rational," I said, pulling my marketing strategy from my bag. "Here's my preliminary plan for Westridge's growth. It leverages their technical expertise while targeting more profitable markets." Nate barely glanced at the document. "Vanessa, be realistic. Our life is in Seattle. You can't commute to Boise. I've already discussed it with Martin, the COO. I'll split my time between Seattle and Boise while building a marketing team." Nate's composure shattered. This is ridiculous. You're throwing away a huge financial opportunity because you're sentimental about your uncle's little company. Westridge isn't little, I said calmly. It's a specialized manufacturer with proprietary technology and over 200 skilled employees. And it's not just about money, it's about people's livelihoods. People adapt, Nate said, his tone cold. That's business. I studied him, the man I'd once thought I'd spend my life with. His handsome features were twisted with frustration, his need for control laid bare. Had he always been this way, or had I been too in love to notice? Why did you try to access my work email? I asked abruptly. He froze, then recovered with a smooth smile. What are you talking about? Zoe told me you came to the office looking for files. Then someone tried to hack my email. Was that you? Your colleague is exaggerating, he said. I needed information for our accountant about your benefits for tax planning. When the office wouldn't help, I tried accessing it from home. The lie was so effortless, it almost convinced me. Almost. What were you really looking for, Nate? His expression hardened. I don't appreciate being interrogated by my wife. And I don't appreciate my husband trying to hack my email, I shot back. What were you afraid I'd have? Emails with Mr. Daniels? Information about Westridge you could use? You're creating conspiracy theories to justify your irrational behavior, he snapped. I sighed, exhausted by the dance. We both need sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. I showed him to the spare bedroom, ignoring his complaints about the mattress and lack of amenities. As I closed my own door, I heard him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Nate was plotting his next move. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, replaying our conversation, the years of our marriage, the subtle ways Nate had shaped me into someone smaller, someone who fit his vision. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Uncle Charlie's faith in me, his cabin, his company, they were a lifeline, a chance to reclaim the fire I'd lost. Tomorrow I'd face Nate again, but this time I'd be fighting for myself. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the room as the rich, bittersweet scent of coffee filled the air. I followed the aroma, my steps hesitant, my mind still tangled in the argument from the night before. Nate stood at the counter, impeccably dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks, his movements deliberate as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. His face was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the tension that had crackled between us just hours ago. I thought we could start fresh today, he said, his voice smooth and inviting as he extended a mug toward me. Last night, I may have come on too strong. The flight, the stress of not being able to reach you, it got to me. I'm sorry. I took the mug, the warmth of the ceramic grounding me as I studied him warily. This was Nate's pattern, one I'd grown all too familiar with over the years. After every storm, he'd offer this olive branch, a charming, conciliatory gesture that made me question my own instincts, my own reality. I could feel the pull of it even now, the part of me that wanted to believe his sincerity, to smooth things over and avoid the conflict I knew was coming. But another part of me, sharper and more resolute, held firm. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness mirroring the unease in my chest, and waited for the inevitable shift in his tone. I get why Westridge means so much to you, Nate continued, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. It's your uncle's legacy, and you want to honor that. I respect that, Vanessa, truly. His words were kind, but there was a calculated edge to them, like a salesman laying the groundwork for the real pitch. I stayed silent, letting him speak, knowing the pivot was coming. But, he said right on cue, I think there's a way to honor Charlie's legacy while still making a smart business move. What if we folded Westridge into Morgan Financial as a separate division? You could oversee its marketing direction, keep its unique culture intact, and still benefit from our resources and connections. It was a masterful offer draped in the guise of compromise. To an outsider, it might have seemed generous, even reasonable. The old Vanessa, the one who had spent years bending to Nate's will to keep the peace, would have seized it, grateful for the illusion of victory. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not entirely. That's an interesting proposal, I said carefully, setting my mug down on the counter. But it still means giving up ownership of Westridge. Nate's smile tightened, a subtle crack in his polished facade. It's not giving up ownership, he said, his tone measured but laced with impatience. It's a restructuring. The value would still be shared between us. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze. Shared, yes, but with control resting firmly with Morgan Financial, which means with you and Derek. He let out a short laugh, tinged with condescension. That's how partnerships work, Nessa. Shared control, shared benefits. The nickname grated, a reminder of how he'd always framed our marriage as a partnership while quietly ensuring his decisions reigned supreme. I straightened, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Except our marriage has never been about shared control, has it? It's always been about you deciding and me eventually falling in line. The air in the room shifted, the warmth of the morning suddenly stifling. Nate's pleasant mask slipped, revealing a flash of irritation. That's unfair, he said, his jaw tightening. I've always considered your opinions. I stepped closer, emboldened by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Considered, sure. But when have you ever actually changed your mind because of me? When have you ever compromised on something that mattered to you? His eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw the Nate I'd always known was there, but had chosen to ignore. The one who didn't negotiate, who didn't bend. I didn't fly all the way to Boise to be psychoanalyzed, he snapped, setting his mug down with a sharp clink. We're discussing a business transaction. I shook my head, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. No, Nate, we're discussing the fundamental dynamic of our relationship. Westridge is just the lens that's making it impossible to ignore. He checked his watch, an expensive timepiece I'd given him for our anniversary last year, a gift that now felt like a symbol of my own complicity in our unbalanced dynamic. I have a conference call in 30 minutes, he said, his tone clipped. We can continue this later. He turned and retreated to the spare bedroom, closing the door with a firm thud. The muffled sound of his voice soon followed, no doubt strategizing with Derek or their attorneys about how to handle my unexpected defiance. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Nate wasn't just fighting for Westridge. He was fighting to maintain the status quo, to keep me in the role I'd played for years, the compliant wife who eventually yielded. While he was occupied, I seized the moment to make a call of my own. I dialed Mr. Daniels, my uncle's attorney, my heart pounding as I skipped the pleasantries. Has anything been filed? I asked. Nothing yet, he replied, his voice calm but reassuring. But I did get a pointed call from a Seattle law firm this morning asking about the structure of your inheritance. I declined to share details without your authorization. Relief flooded through me, loosening the knot in my chest. Thank you, I said. If they file anything, let me know immediately. He assured me he would, adding, the declaration you signed yesterday gives us strong footing, but tread carefully. Next, I called Martin at Westridge. His steady presence was a lifeline, grounding me in the midst of this storm. I updated him on Nate's tactics and asked him to tighten security protocols around the company's systems. The last thing I needed was Nate or Derek trying to access sensitive information to gain leverage. Martin listened quietly, then promised to handle it. We've got your back, Vanessa, he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice brought a lump to my throat. In just a few days, the team at Westridge had shown me more genuine support than Nate had in years of marriage. When Nate emerged from the bedroom an hour later, the charming facade was gone, replaced by a cold, steely determination. I've been patient, Vanessa, he said, his voice low and deliberate. But this has gone far enough. You're making a serious mistake that could have lasting consequences for both of us. I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. What kind of consequences? His eyes narrowed, calculating. Financial, for one. If you insist on this stubborn course, it'll impact our entire investment strategy. The vacation property in Aspen? That's off the table. The country club membership? Likely no longer feasible. I almost laughed at how transparent his threats were. These were things he cared about, not me. Status symbols he'd used to define our life together. I can live with those consequences, I said simply, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. His expression hardened, and he leaned closer, his voice always dropping. There are other considerations, too. Your position at Crawford and Barnes, for instance. Tim Crawford and I have investments together. If he knew you were acting against our joint financial interests, the threat hung in the air, chilling me to the core. My job, my career, was something I'd built through years of hard work, separate from Nate's influence. The idea that he would use his connections to undermine it was a new low, a glimpse of the lengths he'd go to maintain control. But alongside the fear, a strange clarity settled over me. This was who Nate was, a man who would wield every weapon in his arsenal, charm, manipulation, threats, to get what he wanted. Are you actually threatening to interfere with my career if I don't sign over my inheritance? I asked, my voice calm but razor sharp. Nate's expression softened, but it was a calculated shift, not a genuine one. I'm just pointing out the interconnected nature of our lives, Vanessa. Actions have consequences. That's reality. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a resolve that had been building since I first stepped into Westridge, since I first felt the weight of my uncle's legacy in my hands. You're right, Amon, I said, my voice had thrown him. Actions do have consequences, which is why I've taken certain precautions. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. What does that mean? I stepped toward the kitchen counter, picking up my phone. It means I've signed a formal declaration of intent regarding Westridge's ownership, stating clearly that I have no intention of transferring it to you or Morgan Financial. I've also documented your attempts to pressure me, including this conversation. Nate's face reddened, his composure slipping. You're recording me? That's illegal. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was racing. Idaho is a one-party consent state, I said, though I wasn't actually recording. But that's not the point. The point is, I'm done being the wife who gives in to keep the peace. Westridge is mine, and I'm keeping it. For a moment, raw fury flashed across his face, a glimpse of the rage that had always lurked beneath his polished exterior. Then, like a switch flipping, his expression turned cold and professional. You've clearly made your decision, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. I held his gaze, refusing to back down. Is that another threat? He shook his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. It's a statement of fact. You're choosing to act against our joint interest. That has implications for our marriage. I'm choosing to honor my uncle's wishes and protect 200 people's jobs, I countered. If that threatens our marriage, then maybe our foundation wasn't as strong as I thought. Nate gathered his things with methodical precision, his movements deliberate, as if he were already calculating his next move. I'm taking the next flight back to Seattle, he said. We can discuss the status of our relationship when you return, assuming you still consider Seattle your home. I'll be back next week, I said, my voice steady. I have matters to arrange here first. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and turned to face me. One last chance, Vanessa. Sign the transfer documents, and we can put this behind us. I met his gaze, unflinching. No. Something shifted in his eyes, anger giving way to cold calculation. Very well, he said. Safe travels. And with that, he was gone. I sank onto the couch, my body trembling with adrenaline. For the first time in our marriage, I had stood my ground against Nate, and the world hadn't crumbled. Instead, I felt a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear of what he might do next, but exhilaration at finally claiming my own voice. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Security protocols updated at Westridge. All sensitive systems now require additional verification. Take care. The simple message brought a smile to my face. In just a few days, the people at Westridge had shown me a kind of loyalty and respect Nate had never offered. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into work at Westridge, collaborating with the team to refine our marketing strategy, interviewing potential marketing staff with Zoe's remote assistance, and meeting with key clients to introduce myself as the new steward of my uncle's legacy. Each day brought new challenges, but also a growing confidence in my own abilities. I wasn't just protecting Westridge, I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd buried under years of compromise. Mr. Daniels kept me updated on the legal front, As expected, Nate's attorneys were probing for weaknesses in the structure of my inheritance. But Uncle Charlie's meticulous planning had built formidable barriers. For now, Westridge was safe. The night before my return to Seattle, I sat on the cabin's porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. 2 weeks ago, I had been Nate's accommodating wife, shrinking myself to fit the mold he'd created. Now I was standing firm, reclaiming strengths I'd forgotten I possessed. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Zoe calling from Seattle. "How's the Mountaineer treating you, boss lady?" she asked, her cheerful tone a welcome reprieve. I laughed, the nickname easing the tension in my chest. Clearer than I remembered. "How are things there?" Her voice turned serious. "That's why I'm calling. There are some developments you should know about before you get back." My stomach tightened. "What kind of developments?" "Your husband's been busy," she said grimly. "He's been talking to Tim Crawford. Nothing explicit, but enough hints that Tim called me into his office today to ask about your situation." My heart sank. Nate was following through on his threat, using his connection to my boss to apply pressure. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth," Zoe replied fiercely, "that you've inherited a company and are exploring your options, that it's your separate property, not marital assets, and that any attempt to interfere with your employment based on personal matters could be legally problematic." I smiled, gratitude flooding through me. "You didn't." "I absolutely did," she confirmed. "Tim backpedaled so fast he nearly fell out of his chair. Said he was just concerned about your workload, wanted to make sure you had the support you needed." "Thank you," I said softly, "for having my back." "Always," she replied, "but there's more. Nate's been at the office several times, supposedly for lunch with Tim, but he's made a point of chatting with colleagues about your stress levels and difficult family situation. He's laying groundwork, Nessa." "For what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "If I had to guess, for a narrative where you're making irrational decisions due to grief or stress. He's creating doubt about your judgment." It was classic Nate, subtle, insidious manipulation designed to undermine me without direct confrontation. "There's one more thing," Zoe added hesitantly. "Derek Foster has been reaching out to Westridge clients. 2 of them mentioned it when I called about the marketing research." My hand tightened on the phone. "What's he saying?" "Suggesting Westridge might be facing leadership transition issues that could affect delivery schedules, offering Morgan Financial as a stabilizing partner." Rage surged through me, hot and sharp. They were trying to destabilize Westridge's client relationships, to damage its reputation and force my hand. "That's unethical," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Borderline illegal." "Yeah," Zoe agreed, "but not surprising, given what you've told me about them." After we hung up, I called Martin immediately, warning him about Derek's outreach. He was concerned but steady. "We've worked with most of these clients for decades," he said. "They trust us, but we'll be proactive. I'll reach out to our key accounts tomorrow." I spent the rest of the evening preparing for my return to Seattle, not just packing, but steeling myself for what lay ahead. Nate was escalating, pulling every lever he had to bend me to his will. I needed to be ready. When my flight landed at SeaTac the next afternoon, I braced myself for Nate's presence at arrivals, half expecting another round of charm or threats. But the condo was empty when I arrived, though traces of him were everywhere. A coffee cup in the sink, workout clothes draped over the bathroom door, files scattered across the dining table. I unpacked slowly, taking in the space that had been our home. It felt foreign now, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The sleek, expensive furniture Nate had chosen, the artwork selected to impress rather than inspire. It was all a reflection of his taste, his priorities. How had I not noticed how little of myself existed here? As I hung my clothes in the closet, I noticed subtle changes. My things had been rearranged, some pushed to the back, less accessible. Nate had been reorganizing in my absence, literally and metaphorically shifting me to the margins. The symbolism stung, but it also fueled my resolve. I was still processing this when I heard the front door open and close. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the living room. Nate stood there in his tailored suit, briefcase in hand, the picture of a successful businessman. His expression was unreadable as he looked at me. "You're back," he said flatly. "As planned," I replied, keeping my tone even. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, his movements deliberate. "I assume you've had time to reconsider your position." "I've had time to become even more certain of it," I corrected, especially after learning about Derek's calls to Westridge clients. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he masked it. "Derek's doing due diligence on a potential acquisition," he said smoothly. "Standard business practice." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Undermining a company's client relationships isn't due diligence. It's a pressure tactic, and it's unethical." Nate poured himself a scotch from the bar cart, pointedly not offering me one. "This isn't personal, Vanessa. It's business." I shook my head, incredulous. "It became personal the moment you threatened my career." He took a slow sip, studying me over the rim of his glass. "I merely pointed out potential consequences. If you perceive that as a threat, perhaps that says more about your state of mind than my intentions." His ability to twist reality was staggering, a skill he'd honed over years of making me doubt myself. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "My state of mind is clearer than it's been in years," I said, my voice firm. "Crystal clear. I'm keeping Westridge, and I'm going to remain to run it my way. That's non-negotiable." Nate set down his glass with deliberate care, his eyes narrowing. "Then we have a problem." I held his gaze unflinching. "The problem is that you see my inheritance as something you are entitled to control, just as you've taken control of every other aspect of our lives." He scoffed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "You've always had freedom to make your own choices." "As long as they aligned with yours," I shot back. "When was the last time I made a significant decision you disagreed with, and you actually accepted it?" He didn't answer, his silence confirming what I already knew. "You're making a foolish business decision out of sentimentality," he said finally, "and it's affecting our future." "No," I countered. "I'm making a sound business decision based on my understanding of Westridge's potential. And yes, it's affecting our future because for the first time, I'm not yielding to your judgment over my own." He studied me, his expression unreadable, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "This isn't like you," he said. "Actually," I replied, "this is exactly like me. The real me, the one I'd forgotten under years of compromise." He shook his head, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "It's grief. You're not thinking clearly because of your uncle's death. You've attached undue significance to this inheritance because it was his final gift to you." The argument was clever, weaving just enough truth to be plausible. I was grieving Uncle Charlie, and Westridge was deeply tied to his memory. But I wasn't about to let Nate use my emotions to undermine my resolve. "My grief is real," I admitted, "but my business assessment is sound. Westridge has potential that would be wasted if it were absorbed into Morgan Financial." "You can't possibly know that," he insisted. "You spent, what, 10 days there? I've been building and restructuring companies for 15 years. His condescension stung, but it also fueled my determination. "I know enough," I said, "and I'm learning more every day. I'm not the naive wife you think I am, Nate. Not anymore." He stared at me, his expression a mix of frustration and something else. Perhaps the realization that the woman he'd married was no longer the one standing before him. The room fell silent, the weight of our words hanging between us. For the first time, I felt not just the fear of defying him, but the power of reclaiming myself. The sting of Nate's words lingered like a bruise, sharp and tender, as he leaned across the polished countertop, his voice laced with just enough truth to wound. "You're out of your depth, Vanessa," he'd said, his tone cool and measured, as if he were delivering a verdict rather than an opinion. "This isn't your area of expertise." The accusation wasn't entirely false. I wasn't a seasoned executive, hadn't spent decades steering corporate ships through turbulent waters. But I wasn't the naive novice he painted me as either. I'd tackled challenges before, climbed steep learning curves in my marketing career, and emerged stronger each time. His words weren't meant to critique, they were meant to undermine, to chip away at the confidence I'd been carefully rebuilding since Uncle Charlie's death. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze. Then I'll learn, I said, my voice steady despite the churn of doubt in my chest. Just as I've learned and excelled in every professional challenge I've ever faced. Nate's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as if my defiance was a personal affront. He set his glass down with a deliberate clink, the sound sharp in the quiet of our sleek Seattle condo. While you're learning, he said, his voice low and edged with warning, you're putting a significant asset at risk. Our asset. The emphasis on our was unmistakable, a claim staked with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. My heart thudded, but I held my ground. My asset, I corrected, my tone firm but calm, legally and morally mine as per Uncle Charlie's explicit wishes. The words felt like a shield, grounding me in the truth of my inheritance, Westridge Innovations, the company Uncle Charlie had built and entrusted to me. Not to Nate, not to us as a couple, but to me alone. Nate's hand slammed down on the counter, the sudden force making the glass tremble. Enough, he snapped, his composure cracking. This stubborn defiance has gone on long enough. You are making a mistake that affects both of us, and I won't stand by and watch it happen. His words carried the weight of a threat, but beneath the anger I saw something else. Fear, perhaps, that I was slipping beyond his control. I leaned back, studying him, the man I'd married, whose approval I'd once craved like oxygen. What exactly are you going to do, Nate? I asked, my voice soft but unyielding. Threaten my job again? Undermine me with colleagues? Try to sabotage Westridge's business relationships? I'm prepared for all of that now. My words hung between us, a quiet challenge born of months spent anticipating his moves, bracing for the ways he might try to pull me back into his orbit. A cold, calculating glint entered his eyes, and for a moment I saw the strategist behind the husband, the man who thrived on leverage and power. There are other approaches, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Our prenuptial agreement has specific clauses about assets acquired during marriage. My attorneys believe we have grounds to challenge your uncle's attempt to bypass those provisions. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I'd anticipated this possibility, had even discussed it with my own lawyer in the quiet hours after Uncle Charlie's will was read, but hearing it from Nate's lips, his willingness to weaponize our marriage against me, sent a chill through my core. You'd actually take legal action against your own wife over her inheritance? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, not out of fear but out of disbelief at the depth of his betrayal. He leaned forward, his expression softening into something almost paternal, as if he were reasoning with a child. I'd be protecting our joint financial interests, he said smoothly. Despite your temporary emotional state, it would be for your own good in the long run. The phrase, for your own good, cut deeper than any legal threat. How many times had he used those words to justify his control? How many times had I swallowed them, convincing myself he knew better, that his judgment was sharper, his vision clearer? Each instance had eroded a piece of my autonomy, leaving me smaller, less certain, until I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to trust my own instincts. But not anymore. I think we need some space, I said, the decision crystallizing with every word sharp and clear as glass. I'm going to stay with Zoe for a few days while we figure this out. Nate's face twisted, a flicker of disdain crossing his features. Running away won't solve anything, he said, his tone dismissive, as if I were a petulant teenager sneaking out after curfew. I'm not running away, I countered, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling inside me. I'm giving us both room to think clearly without escalating this further. His expression shifted again, this time to something softer, almost pleading, a tactic I recognized all too well. Nessa, we don't need to be apart, he said, his voice warm and coaxing. Let's talk this through rationally. I'm sure we can find a compromise that works for both of us. The rapid pivot from threats to reconciliation was a dance I knew by heart, one designed to keep me off balance, to lure me back into the familiar cycle of capitulation. But this time I saw it for what it was, a performance, not a partnership. I think space is exactly what we need right now, I said, standing firm, my resolve like a steel thread running through me. I'll pack a bag. I moved toward the bedroom, my heart pounding but my steps sure. Nate followed, his tone growing more urgent with every step. This is unnecessary, Vanessa. We can resolve this here. Now, what would it take? A formal role for you at Westridge after the acquisition? A dedicated budget for the initiatives you believe in? I'm willing to be flexible. I ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. I pulled a suitcase from the closet, methodically packing clothes, toiletries, my laptop. My fingers brushed against the blue folder containing Uncle Charlie's notes, the ones I'd brought back from Boise, filled with his vision for Westridge and his unshakable belief in me. I tucked it carefully into the bag, a talisman against the uncertainty ahead. This isn't a negotiation, I said quietly, zipping the suitcase shut. I've made my decision about Westridge. What we need to figure out now is what that means for us. Nate's face hardened, the mask of conciliation slipping away. If you walk out that door, you're making a statement about your priorities, he said, his voice low and menacing. And if you're making threats about my inheritance, you're making a statement about yours, I shot back, meeting his gaze without flinching. He stepped into the bedroom doorway, blocking my path, his presence imposing. Think carefully about what you're doing, Vanessa, he said, his voice a warning wrapped in silk. Actions have consequences. I looked at him, this man I'd loved, whose approval I'd once measured my worth by, and felt a strange calm settle over me. I'm well aware of that, I said, my voice steady. Please move. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, that he'd stand there, immovable, forcing a confrontation. But then, with a slowness that felt deliberate, almost theatrical, he stepped aside. I walked past him, suitcase in hand, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back as I headed for the door. This isn't over, he called after me, his voice sharp with promise. Not by a long shot. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned to face him one last time. No, it isn't, I said, my voice calm but resolute. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. I stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind me, and the click of the latch felt like a release, a shedding of a weight I'd carried for years. The future was uncertain, fraught with challenges I couldn't yet predict, but for the first time in a long time, I was choosing my own path, guided by my own judgment, my own values. As I walked away from the condo, Uncle Charlie's voice seemed to echo in my mind, soft but certain. Trust yourself, Nessa. You've always had better instincts than you give yourself credit for. And in that moment, I was beginning to believe him. The evening air was cool against my skin as I wheeled my suitcase through Seattle's downtown streets, still buzzing with the hum of early evening life. People hurried past, heading home from work or meeting friends for dinner, their lives unfolding in predictable rhythms. Just days ago, I'd been one of them, moving through a carefully curated existence where I played the supporting role in my own story. Now everything had shifted, and the weight of that change felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Zoe had offered to pick me up, but I'd chosen to walk the 10 blocks to her Capitol Hill apartment, needing the time to clear my head, to let the city's pulse steady my own. When I reached Zoe's building, she flung open the door before I could knock, pulling me into a fierce hug that smelled of lavender and coffee. Proud of you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Those 3 words hit me like a wave, and I felt tears prick my eyes, unexpected and raw. How long had it been since someone had celebrated my choices instead of trying to reshape them? Zoe's apartment was a vibrant contrast to the sterile elegance of the condo I shared with Nate. Bright artwork splashed across the walls, books spilled over every surface, and mismatched furniture somehow created a space that felt like a warm embrace. Guest room's ready, she said, taking my suitcase with a grin. And I've got a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc chilling. You look like you could use a glass, or 3. Over wine, I recounted the confrontation with Nate, the words spilling out as I relived every tense moment. Zoe listened, her expressive face shifting from anger to concern to quiet satisfaction as I described holding my ground. He actually threatened legal action? She asked, her voice incredulous. Against his own wife, over an inheritance? I nodded, mimicking Nate's smooth, reasonable tone. He framed it as protecting our joint financial interest, of course. Zoe snorted, rolling her eyes. Convenient how your interests always seem to align perfectly with his plans, isn't it? And when they don't, suddenly you're the emotional, irrational one. Her words struck a chord, echoing the realization I'd been grappling with. Throughout our marriage, Nate had cast himself as the rational decision maker, dismissing my objections as emotional outbursts to be managed rather than valid perspectives to be respected. The thing is, I said, swirling the wine in my glass, he's not entirely wrong about my experience. I haven't run a company before. I'm learning as I go. Zoe leaned forward, her eyes fierce. So what? Every CEO was new once. You've got marketing expertise, business smarts, and you're sharp as hell. Plus, Westridge has a seasoned team that knows the industry inside out. What you don't know, you'll learn. Her unwavering confidence was a lifeline, bolstering the resolve I'd been nurturing. That's basically what I told him, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. But he sees it as a reckless risk, not a chance to grow. Zoe's expression softened, but her words were blunt. Because it's not a risk, he's controlling. That's what this is about, isn't it? Control. The word landed like a stone, heavy with truth. Control. It had crept into our marriage slowly, insidiously, through small decisions. Where we lived, who we socialized with, how we managed our finances. Each choice had seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they'd woven a web that diminished my voice, my agency. What are you going to do now? Zoe asked, her voice gentle but probing. I sighed, staring into my glass. Professionally, I need to handle things at Crawford and Barnes. If Nate has been talking to Tim, I need to address that head on. Personally, but I trailed off. The question too vast, too raw. I don't know yet. I need time to think, to get perspective. Zoe nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. You can stay here as long as you need. Mi casa es tu casa, and all that. That night, in the quiet of Zoe's guest room, I pulled out Uncle Charlie's blue folder, its edges worn from my repeated handling. His notes were a blend of strategic brilliance and personal insight, a roadmap for Westridge's future and a testament to his faith in me. Nessa has the marketing mind we need, he'd written. Her ability to translate technical capabilities into client needs will take Westridge to the next level. And later, in a note that felt like a whisper from beyond, important that Nessa has full control, not influenced by outside pressures or conflicting priorities. Had he seen something in my marriage I'd been too blind to notice? Had he structured my inheritance to force me to confront the dynamics I'd let slide for years? As I drifted to sleep, his words anchored me, a reminder that I was capable of more than I'd allowed myself to believe. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Whatever happened with Nate, I was committed to honoring Uncle Charlie's trust by giving Westridge my all. At Crawford and Barnes, I marched straight to Tim Crawford's office, requesting a meeting before he could summon me. His assistant's raised eyebrows suggested this wasn't my usual deference, but she ushered me in. Tim, silver-haired and old school, looked up from his computer with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Vanessa, good to see you back, he said, his tone polite but guarded. I understand you have had some family matters to attend to. Yes, I said, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. A small act of defiance that felt monumental. My uncle's passing and the responsibilities that came with it, which I believe you've discussed with my husband. Tim shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Nate and I spoke briefly, he admitted. He expressed concern about how you're balancing these new obligations with your work here. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I appreciate the concern, but my personal and professional responsibilities are mine to manage, and I'd prefer they remain separate from my husband's business relationships. Tim's eyebrows rose at my directness, a quality I'd rarely shown in his presence. I'd always been competent, reliable, but never this assertive. Of course, he said carefully, though Nate did raise valid points about potential conflicts of interest, given your new ownership position. I leaned forward, my voice firm. There are no conflicts. Westridge operates in a completely different industry from our clients here. I've reviewed our ethics guidelines to confirm this. Tim nodded slowly, his eyes assessing. Nevertheless, perception matters in our business. Clients might question divided loyalties. I was ready for this. Which is why I've drafted a clear delineation of my roles, I said, placing a document on his desk. It outlines how I'll manage my time between Westridge and Crawford and Barnes, ensuring no compromise in client service. Tim scanned the document, his expression unreadable but attentive. "This is thorough," he said finally. "I take my responsibilities seriously," I replied. "What I don't appreciate is having my professional judgment questioned based on conversations with my husband instead of with me directly." Tim set the document down, studying me with a new respect. "Fair point," he conceded. "I should have spoken with you first." "Yes," I agreed, my voice steady, "just as you would with any other executive in this firm." A beat of silence passed, then Tim nodded decisively. "The arrangement you have outlined seems workable, provided client service remains at our standards. We'll proceed on that basis." "Thank you," I said, rising to leave. But Tim stopped me. "One more thing, Vanessa. Nate mentioned you've been under significant stress lately. If you need support—" I cut him off, my voice smooth but firm. "What I need is for my personal life to remain separate from my professional evaluations. I trust that won't be an issue going forward." Without waiting for a response, I walked out, my back straight, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and triumph. So, the conversation had gone better than I'd hoped. Tim respected directness, even if it caught him off guard coming from me. By day's end, word of my dual role had spread through the office. Colleagues stopped by with congratulations and questions, their curiosity thinly veiled. I answered openly but kept my personal life private, a boundary I was learning to enforce. After work, I skipped Zoe's apartment and wandered to Pike Place Market, where the evening bustle was winding down. The mingled sense of flowers, fish, and fresh produce grounded me, soothing the nerves still jangling from the day. I found a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay, settled at a window table with a cup of tea, and watched the ferries glide across the darkening water. On impulse, I called my mother, something I'd been avoiding for days. She answered on the third ring, her voice tinged with worry. "Vanessa, is everything all right? It's not like you to call on a weekday." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't fully feel. "Just wanted to check in." "Well, that's nice," she said, unconvinced. "How are things with you and Nate? He mentioned you've been going through a difficult time." Of course he had. Nate never missed a chance to shape the narrative. "When did you talk to him?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yesterday," she said. "He sounded worried. Said you've been under terrible stress since Charlie's passing and might be making hasty decisions." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mom, I inherited Uncle Charlie's company, Westridge Innovations. It's an incredible opportunity, and I'm taking an active role in running it." Her response was immediate, laced with that familiar, patronizing concern. "Oh, honey, are you sure that's wise? You already have a demanding career, and Nate mentioned the company needs significant restructuring." I bit back a sigh. "The company is financially sound," I said firmly, "and I have the skills to help it grow." "But surely Nate would be better positioned to handle something like this, with his business background," she said, her assumptions stinging as much as I'd expected. "This is my inheritance, Mom," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Uncle Charlie left Westridge to me because he believed in my abilities." There was a pause, then her voice softened, but the concern remained. "Charlie always had unconventional ideas, but marriage is about partnership. Vanessa, you and Nate need to make these decisions together." The word partnership felt like a slap, a reminder of how often I'd been expected to defer. "Partnership doesn't mean one person always gives in," I said. "Sometimes we need to make our own choices." "What does that mean?" Her voice sharpened with alarm. "Nate mentioned you're not staying at home right now." I closed my eyes, gathering my thoughts. "Mom, Nate and I are having disagreements about Westridge. I'm staying with a friend while we sort things out." "You've left your husband?" The shock in her voice was palpable. "Over a business disagreement?" "It's not just about Westridge," I said, my voice firm. "It's about respect, about valuing each other's judgment and autonomy." She sighed, dismissive. "Every marriage has challenges, Vanessa. Your father and I had our share. I cut her off, unwilling to let the conversation slide into platitudes. Mom, I need you to hear me. This isn't just a challenge. It's about who I am and what I'm capable of. Uncle Charlie saw that, and I'm starting to see it too. The line went quiet, and for a moment I thought she might argue. But then she sighed again, softer this time. I just want you to be happy, Vanessa. I know, I said, my voice softening too. And I'm working on that. Later, when Nate reached out to talk, I agreed to meet him at a neutral restaurant, hoping distance might keep the conversation civil. He greeted me with a smile, his charm dialed up, as if the past days hadn't happened. I think we've been talking past each other, he said, his tone conciliatory. We both want what's best for Westridge. We just have different perspectives. I nodded, wary but willing to listen. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, cutting through the pleasantries. A true partnership, he said, leaning forward, his eyes earnest. Not absorption into Morgan Financial, as I initially suggested, but a collaborative approach where we combine our strengths, your marketing vision with my financial expertise. It sounded reasonable, the kind of compromise that had once swayed me, but I knew better now. It was another path to the same end, a way to keep me tethered to his control. And how would this partnership be structured? I asked, my voice neutral. In terms of ownership and decision-making authority? A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before his smooth mask returned. We could establish a joint holding company, he said, with both of us having input on major decisions. The details would need to be worked out, of course. He paused, then added, I'd take the lead in areas where my expertise is stronger, just as you would in marketing and client relationships. I sipped my water, letting the words settle. It was a concession wrapped in control, a way to give me a role while ensuring he held the reins. Our first course arrived, but I barely noticed, my mind already turning over the next steps, the choices I'd need to make to protect Westridge and myself. I sat across from Nate, the polished mahogany of the restaurant table reflecting the soft glow of Liato's chandeliers, a veneer of elegance masking the tension simmering between us. His proposal hung in the air like a carefully laid trap, dressed up as a partnership but designed to keep his hand firmly on the reins of Westridge, the company Uncle Charlie had entrusted to me alone. The weight of his words pressed against my chest, not because they were persuasive, but because they carried the familiar sting of his assumption that I'd eventually bend to his logic. I traced the rim of my wine glass, buying time to steady the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Frustration, defiance, and a flicker of doubt I refused to let take root. It's an intriguing offer, I said after the server slipped away, my voice measured but laced with a quiet challenge. But it sidesteps the core issue. Uncle Charlie didn't leave Westridge to us as a couple. He left it to me, deliberately with a structure that ensures my control. That wasn't an accident. My words were calm, but beneath them lay a resolve forged by years of watching Nate subtly reshape our shared life to fit his vision. Nate's jaw tightened, a subtle shift in his otherwise composed demeanor, like a crack in a marble statue. His eyes, sharp and calculating, held mine for a moment before he spoke. Charlie's intentions, while heartfelt, were rooted in a limited perspective. He couldn't have foreseen the financial strategies we've developed at Morgan Financial, or the opportunities that come with scale and integration. His tone was smooth, practiced, but it carried an undercurrent of condescension that made my skin prickle. He leaned back slightly, as if settling into the certainty that his reasoning would prevail. I felt a spark of defiance flare in my chest. Or maybe he saw it all too clearly, I countered, my voice steady but edged with conviction. Maybe he knew Westridge's strength lies in its independence, in its ability to stay nimble and focused rather than being swallowed into a sprawling portfolio where it's just another asset to leverage. I thought of Uncle Charlie's weathered hands, the way he'd spoken of Westridge like it was a living thing built on trust and precision, not just numbers on a balance sheet. That legacy wasn't just a business. It was a piece of him, and now a piece of me. Nate's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of frustration and disappointment flickering across his face. Vanessa, that's naive, he said, his voice dipping into that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. In today's market, scale is survival. Small players like Westridge are exposed, vulnerable to competitors with deeper resources. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. The accusation landed like a slap, predictable yet cutting. Nate always fell back on questioning my rationality when his arguments faltered, as if my attachment to Westridge was a childish whim rather than a reasoned stance. I felt a wry smile tug at my lips, not because I was amused, but because I'd anticipated this move. I'm not clinging to sentiment, I said, my voice cool and deliberate. I'm advocating for a model that plays to Westridge's strengths, its specialized expertise, its personal touch with clients. Its size isn't a weakness, it's what sets it apart in a niche market. I thought of the clients who'd stayed loyal for decades, the ones who trusted Westridge because it wasn't another faceless conglomerate. We've thrived for 40 years by being erasing what we are. Diluting that to fit your vision of scale would strip away what makes us unique. Nate shook his head, a gesture heavy with exasperation. This is why emotional attachment distorts business decisions. You're holding on to Charlie's outdated model because it feels personal, not because it's strategic. His words were sharp, meant to wound, to make me question myself. But I'd spent too many years second-guessing my instincts to appease him. Not tonight. My decision isn't about emotion, I said, holding his gaze. It's about leveraging what Westridge does best. But we're just circling the same argument, Nate. I've made my choice. Westridge stays independent, and I'm stepping into an active role to ensure it. The words felt like a line drawn in the sand, one I wasn't sure I could cross back over. He set his fork down with a deliberate clink, the pretense of a civil dinner dissolving. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I saw the man behind the polished facade, not the charming husband, but the strategist who hated losing. "And what about our marriage?" he asked, his voice low, heavy with implication. "Does that factor into your decision at all?" The question hung between us, a gauntlet thrown down. My heart thudded, not from fear, but from the weight of what it revealed about us. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Our marriage should be strong enough to survive me making choices about my own inheritance," I said. "If it isn't, then we're facing bigger problems than Westridge." My voice was steady, but inside a quiet ache bloomed. Not for Nate, but for the version of us I'd once believed in, the one where love didn't come with strings. Nate leaned forward, his tone sharp but controlled. "This isn't about your independence, Vanessa. It's about making decisions that impact our shared future without consulting me. I've considered your perspective, but you're dismissing mine." "I've considered it," I shot back, my voice firm. "I just don't agree with it. What you're really saying is that I've reached a conclusion you don't like." The truth of it hung in the air, raw and unyielding. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the stem of his wineglass. He wasn't used to me standing my ground, not like this. "You're being unreasonable," he said, his voice clipped. "No," I corrected. "I'm being decisive." The distinction felt like a revelation, a reclaiming of something I'd let slip away over years of compromises. I thought of my parents' marriage, my father's unyielding dominance, my mother's quiet concessions, her life shaped by his will. Was that what I wanted? To mold myself into someone smaller to keep the peace? The thought made my stomach churn. Later, at my mother's urging, I found myself defending my stance over the phone, her voice thick with concern and disapproval. "You're throwing away a wonderful marriage over stubbornness," she said, her words echoing Nate's in a way that made my chest tighten. "Nathan has given you a beautiful life. I built that life too, Mom," I replied softly, the weight of my contributions, my career, my sacrifices, my silenced voice, pressing against my ribs. "And beauty doesn't mean much if it costs me my voice." The silence that followed was heavy, a moment where I knew my words had struck a chord, though I doubted they'd shift her perspective. My mother had made her choices long ago, wrapping them in justifications to make them bearable. I wasn't her. "Just promise me you'll think carefully before you do anything rash," she said finally. "Marriages like yours are rare." I hung up and sat by the window, watching the ferries glide across the bay, their lights cutting through the dusk. She was right about one thing: I needed to think carefully. Not for Nate, not for her, but for me. I owed myself decisions made from clarity, not reaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow. Liato at 7. Liato, with its hushed luxury and unspoken rule against public scenes, was a calculated choice. Nate's chessboard, where he controlled the moves. I typed back, I'll be there. Better to face him head on than let the uncertainty fester. The next day was a blur of meetings at Crawford and Barnes, followed by a video call with Westridge's executive team. Sanjay's update on a new technical solution sparked a surge of excitement in me. Its potential was real, tangible. Martin's report on client loyalty, despite Derek's poaching attempts, steadied my resolve. No one had jumped ship. Westridge was holding strong, and so was I. By late afternoon, I was preparing for dinner with Nate, slipping into a sleek black sheath dress at Zoe's apartment. The mirror reflected a woman who looked confident, but inside, I braced for Nate's next move. Pressure, manipulation, or a new compromise designed to look fair while serving his ends. Zoe watched me, her eyes sharp with concern. He's going to try to make you doubt yourself, she warned, handing me my earrings. That's his trick, getting you to question your own reality until you cave. I know, I said, applying a final touch of lipstick. But I see his playbook now. That's the difference. Liato's understated elegance enveloped me as I stepped inside, the soft lighting and murmured conversations creating a cocoon of discretion. Nate stood as I approached, impeccable in his tailored suit, his smile polite but guarded. You look lovely, he said, pulling out my chair. Thank you, I replied, settling in, my senses heightened. This is quite the setting for a conversation. Neutral ground seemed best, he said smoothly, signaling the sommelier. And their wine list is unmatched. His charm was a polished weapon, but I wasn't disarmed. Once our wine was poured and orders taken, Nate leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of calculated sincerity. I've reflected on our situation, he began, and I may have been too forceful. I'm sorry for that. The apology, perfectly timed, set my nerves on edge. Nate didn't apologize unless it served a purpose. I appreciate that, I said, my tone neutral, waiting for the pivot. Your connection to Westridge is understandable, he continued. Charlie meant a lot to you, and this is his legacy. I should have been more sensitive to that. There it was, the subtle framing of my stance as emotional, not strategic. My fingers tightened around my glass. My decision isn't about sentiment, I said, my voice firm but calm. It's about business analysis and conviction. Westridge's model works because of its independence, not despite it. Nate sipped his wine, his expression unreadable. Of course, there's a difference. The words were conciliatory, but his tone suggested otherwise. We ate in tense silence, the exquisite food tasteless against the bitterness between us. When dessert menus arrived, I waved mine away, ready to end the charade. We still need to discuss where we go from here, Nate said as the server cleared our plates. Yes, I agreed, but not tonight. We both need time to think. I've had plenty of time while you have been at Zoe's, he said, a hint of accusation sharpening his words. The question is simple. Are you coming home? The word home landed like a stone in my chest. Our condo, with its sleek furniture and panoramic views, was beautiful, but it had become a place where I'd learned to tiptoe around Nate's expectations. Not yet, I said, the words heavy but certain. I need more time. His expression darkened. Time won't change the facts, Vanessa. Either you're committed to our marriage and our future, or you're choosing Westridge over us. The ultimatum was classic Nate, reducing a complex truth to a binary choice that framed me as the villain if I didn't comply. That's a false choice, I said, my voice steady. I can be committed to our marriage and still keep Westridge independent. The real question is whether you can accept that. Outside, the spring evening was cool, the air sharp against my skin. Nate hailed a rideshare with practiced ease. Where should I tell them to take you, he asked, his tone neutral, but laced with challenge. Home or back to Zoe's? Zoe's, I said without hesitation. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise maybe, at my resolve. Normally I'd be scrambling to smooth things over, but not tonight. This separation isn't sustainable, he said as the car pulled up. Sooner or later you'll have to choose. I already have, I replied, meeting his gaze. The question is whether you can accept it. As the car pulled away, I caught his reflection in the side mirror. Frustration and confusion etched into the face of a man whose carefully constructed world was slipping out of his control. Back at Zoe's, I kicked off my heels and sank onto the couch beside her. She looked up from her laptop, her expression expectant. How'd it go? As expected, I said, rubbing my temples. A compromise that still gives him control, then frustration when I didn't bite. Shocker, she said dryly. What's his next play? He's framing it as me choosing between our marriage and Westridge, I said, as if I can't have both on my terms. Zoe closed her laptop, her eyes piercing. And what do you want, Vanessa? Not Nate, not your mom, not even Charlie. You. The question hit like a spotlight, illuminating a corner of my mind I'd kept shadowed. I want to honor Charlie's trust in me by giving Westridge everything I've got, I said slowly. I want to see it thrive, to prove I can lead it. I paused, the next words catching in my throat. And I want a relationship where I don't have to shrink myself to keep the peace, where my judgment isn't just tolerated until I fall in line. Saying it aloud was like breaking a dam, terrifying, exhilarating. Zoe's eyes softened. Is that possible with Nate? I don't know, I admitted. 7 years of patterns don't vanish overnight, but I'm not ready to walk away without trying to rebuild something equal. She nodded. You deserve that, whatever happens with Westridge or Nate. The next morning, my phone rang with an unexpected call from Mr. Daniels, Westridge's attorney. Morgan Financial has made a direct offer to buy out the minority shareholders, he said without preamble. They're targeting former executives and Charlie's old partners. My heart sank. How is that possible? I hold the controlling interest. They're after the minority shares, about 30% of the company, he explained. Not enough for control, but enough to make management a nightmare. Is it legal? I asked, my mind racing. Perfectly, he confirmed. The shareholders can sell to anyone, and Morgan's offer is well above market value. Nate and Derek were playing hardball. If they couldn't get my shares, they'd buy influence and pressure me from within. It was clever, ruthless, and entirely in character. What are my options? I asked. You could match their offer, but it'd require significant capital, Daniel said. Or you could let them proceed and deal with Morgan as a major shareholder. Both paths were grim, draining my finances or inviting Nate's influence into Westridge's operations. I thanked Daniels and hung up, staring at my computer screen as a third option began to take shape. It was risky, uncharted, but it could preserve Westridge's independence and my own. I made 3 calls, to Martin at Westridge, to Zoe, and to a former client at a top venture capital firm. By day's end, I had the skeleton of a plan that sparked a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. That evening, Nate texted, "We need to talk about Morgan Financial's offer to Westridge's minority shareholders. This could have been avoided."
Jaja.
The message dripped with his signature blend of fact and threat. I didn't reply immediately, focusing instead on my presentation. Hours later, I sent a single response. Yes, we do. My office at Crawford and Barnes, 10 a.m. tomorrow. For once, I'd set the terms. Not in his chosen arena, but in mine, where I felt most myself. The morning light streamed into my office as I arranged my materials, my heart steady despite the stakes. This meeting wasn't just about Westridge, it was about who I'd choose to be. Nate arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, his suit impeccable, his expression a mask of calm, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing to a chair. "Your choice of venue is interesting," he remarked, glancing around. "I'd have thought this deserved more privacy." "This is a business discussion," I said evenly. My office seemed fitting. He sat, unbuttoning his jacket with deliberate care. "Let's cut to it. Morgan Financial's offer to the minority shareholders is generous. Several are ready to accept." "I'm aware," I said. "Daniels told me. Is this your move to force my hand?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "It's good business. If we can't get your shares, we'll build our position another way." "And then," I pressed, "use that leverage to pressure me?" He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I leaned forward, ready to play my own hand, one that would redefine the game entirely. The tension in the room was palpable as I sat across from Nate, his hands spread wide in a gesture that screamed calculated reason. He was offering me an olive branch, or so he wanted it to seem. "We could find a way to coexist," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth, like he'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "It's possible, though full integration would obviously be more efficient." His words hung in the air, heavy with the implication that my surrender, handing over the rest of Westridge's shares, would be the simplest path. But simplicity wasn't what I was after anymore. Not after years of bending, yielding, and reshaping myself to fit his vision of our life. I leaned back in my chair, letting his proposal linger for a moment as I studied him. Nate's confidence had always been his armor, but I could see the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a crack in the facade he'd spent years perfecting. "I've been thinking about coexistence too," I said, my tone measured, masking the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "But maybe not in the way you're imagining." With a steady hand, I opened the folder on the table and slid a stack of documents toward him. "This is my counterproposal." Nate's eyebrows arched, a subtle tell of his surprise, as he reached for the top document. His fingers moved quickly, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the words with growing disbelief. I watched as his expression shifted from curiosity to something sharper. Shock, maybe even betrayal. "You're not serious," he said finally, his voice low, almost accusing, as he met my gaze. "I'm entirely serious," I replied, keeping my tone calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. My heart pounded, but I refused to let it show. "I've secured partnership interest from Cascade Venture Partners to fund a management buyout of all minority shares in Westridge. We're also launching a new marketing subsidiary to take Westridge's innovations to broader markets. Zoe will be co-director of this initiative with me." For a moment, Nate was speechless, his mouth slightly open as he processed the bombshell I just dropped. I could see the gears turning in his mind, trying to reconcile the woman sitting across from him with the one he thought he knew. The one who, for years, had deferred to his decisions, softened her edges to keep the peace, and let him steer the ship of our marriage. But that version of me was gone, replaced by someone who had finally found her voice. I pressed forward, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The venture capital is already committed. The paperwork is being finalized. By this time next week, Westridge will be wholly owned by the new partnership structure, with me holding controlling interest." Nate's jaw tightened, his silence giving way to a burst of incredulity. "This is absurd," he managed, his voice sharper now. "You've had no time to pull something like this together. Venture capital deals take months to negotiate." "Normally, yes," I acknowledged, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But James Thornton at Cascade has been tracking Westridge's innovations for years. When I presented Uncle Charlie's strategic plan and our vision for the marketing subsidiary, he saw the potential immediately. I wasn't bluffing. The previous day had been a whirlwind, endless calls, tense meetings, and late-night negotiations that left me drained but exhilarated. By the end, we'd secured a tentative agreement that would not only protect Westridge's future but catapult it into new territory. This wasn't just a power move. It was a lifeline for everything Uncle Charlie had built, and for the part of myself I'd buried for too long. Nate's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a hard edge. "You went behind my back," he said, each word laced with accusation, "making major financial decisions without consulting me." The irony hit me like a slap, and I couldn't help the bitter smile that tugged at my lips. "Just like you did when you approached Westridge's minority shareholders," I shot back, my voice quiet but firm. "The difference is I'm being transparent about it." His face flushed, and he leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "That was different," he insisted. "I was protecting our joint interests." "No," I said, my voice steady but laced with years of suppressed frustration. "You were pursuing your interests, regardless of mine." I slid another document across the table, this one heavier with emotional weight. "There's one more thing we need to discuss." Nate picked it up, his movements slow, almost wary. As he read the title, Separation Papers, his expression darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Separation papers?" he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. You can't be serious. I am, I replied, my stomach churning, but my resolve unshaken. I believe we need formal space to figure out if our marriage can continue on more equal terms. The words felt like stones dropping into a still pond, their ripples spreading through the room, through our history, through the life we'd built together over 7 years. Nate's voice rose, sharp with incredulity. All this over a company? You're willing to throw away our marriage because of your uncle's inheritance? This isn't about Westridge, us, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. It's about a pattern that's been there from the start. You make decisions, and I eventually fall in line. You set the terms, and I adapt. That's not partnership, Nate. That's control. The truth of those words burned in my chest, a truth I'd spent years avoiding. Admitting it now, out loud, felt like breaking free from chains I hadn't realized I was wearing. Nate stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, his movements restless, almost frantic. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice tight. Every marriage involves compromise. Sometimes one person leads, sometimes the other. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. When have you ever followed my lead on something important? When have you ever shifted your position to align with mine instead of expecting me to bend? The question hung between us, heavy and unanswered. Nate's silence was louder than any argument he could have made, a stark confirmation of the imbalance that had defined our marriage. Softening my tone, I continued, I don't want a divorce, Nate, but I need to know if we can rebuild this relationship on equal ground. And I can only figure that out if I stand firm in my own choices now. Nate's expression flickered. Anger, disbelief, and something colder, more calculated. He straightened his jacket with a sharp tug, his voice icy. You've clearly made up your mind. But don't expect me to sit around waiting while you find yourself or whatever this is. I won't be put on hold indefinitely. I understand, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I'm not asking for forever, just space to stand in my own strength and see where that leaves us. He picked up the separation papers, folding them with precise, deliberate movements before slipping them into his jacket pocket. At the door, he paused, turning back to me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Part resentment, part something softer, almost vulnerable. You know, Vanessa, he said, his voice quieter now. You've changed. Yes, I replied simply, meeting his gaze. I have. After he left, I sat at my desk, the weight of what I'd just done settling over me like a heavy fog. I had challenged Nate, not just over Westridge, but over the very foundation of our relationship. For the first time, I'd drawn a line in the sand, one I couldn't cross back over with apologies or compromises. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no safety net below. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered the remaining documents, but beneath the fear was a quiet, unfamiliar sense of liberation. I was no longer the woman who smoothed things over, who sacrificed her own voice to keep the peace. That woman had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who was finally stepping into her own power. The weeks that followed were a blur of relentless activity. The management buyout moved forward with astonishing speed, fueled by James Thornton's enthusiasm for Westridge's potential. Zoe, with her characteristic fire, resigned from Crawford and Barnes and threw herself into building our new marketing subsidiary, her energy infectious as we brainstormed ways to bring Westridge's innovations to the world. I juggled my role at Crawford and Barnes with bi-weekly commutes to Boise, where I oversaw the buyout and laid the groundwork for our new venture. Tim Crawford, my boss, had been skeptical at first, but when he saw the potential for new business opportunities between our firms, his doubts gave way to cautious support. Nate and I communicated mostly through our attorneys, though he called occasionally, his tone swinging between conciliatory and coldly strategic. He had accepted the separation, but it was clear he viewed it as a temporary hurdle, a chess move he could counter with enough time and maneuvering. I wasn't so sure. The patterns I'd named in that meeting weren't just business tactics, they were the scaffolding of our marriage, and dismantling them would require more than a few phone calls or carefully worded emails. One rainy June afternoon, about 2 months after our confrontation, I received an unexpected message from Eleanor, Nate's mother. She was in Seattle and wanted to meet for tea. My stomach nodded with apprehension, but curiosity won out, and I agreed. We met at a quiet tea room in Madison Park, a place Eleanor had always loved for its understated elegance. She was already there when I arrived, her tailored navy suit impeccable, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. "Vanessa," she said, rising slightly as I approached, her smile warm but guarded. "Thank you for meeting me." "It's good to see you, Eleanor," I said, meaning it despite the complicated history between us. I settled into the chair across from her, noticing the way her eyes scanned me, searching for signs of strain or weakness. I wondered if she saw the woman her son had married or the one who had just upended his carefully controlled world. "Concerned," she said bluntly when I asked how she was, her directness catching me off guard. "About you and Nathan." I nodded, accepting a cup of Earl Grey from the server before responding. "I'm sure he's shared his side of the story." "He has," Eleanor said, stirring her tea with deliberate care. "But I suspect there is more to it." Her words surprised me. Eleanor had always been Nate's staunchest ally, subtly reinforcing his role as the decision-maker in our marriage. The idea that she might see beyond his narrative was unexpected, and I felt a flicker of hope mingled with caution. "There usually is," I said carefully, unsure how much to reveal. Eleanor's gaze softened, and she set her teacup down with precision. "Nathan tells me you've secured venture capital funding for your uncle's company and started a new marketing division, all while keeping your role at Crawford and Barnes. That's no small feat." "It's been a busy few months," I admitted, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the weight of the conversation. "Impressive," she said, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. "Nathan didn't think you could pull it off." Her frankness startled me, and she noticed, her lips curving into a slight, knowing smile. "You're wondering why I'm not automatically taking his side. The answer might surprise you. I see something in your situation that feels familiar." She paused, her eyes distant as she continued. "My late husband, Nathan's father, was much like my son, brilliant, driven, accustomed to getting his way. For 38 years, I molded myself to his preferences, smoothed his path, and buried my own desires to keep the peace. When Gerald died, I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. I'd spent so long being Mrs. Gerald Morgan that Eleanor had vanished." Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet pain in her words, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "The past 5 years have been about rediscovering her. It's been hard, but it's also been freeing." I listened, captivated by this glimpse into a woman I thought I knew. "I had no idea," I said softly. "Of course not," she replied with a small smile. "I kept up the facade everyone expected. But watching you these past months, standing your ground, building something of your own, despite Nathan's pressure, I see you making a choice I never had the courage to make." Her words settled over me, heavy with meaning. Eleanor had seen the crossroads I was standing at, the same one she'd faced decades ago and chosen differently. Our conversation drifted to lighter topics after that, but her candor stayed with me, adding a new layer to my understanding of Nate and the forces that had shaped him. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new Capitol Hill apartment, watching the sunset bathe Seattle in hues of gold and pink. I'd moved out of Zoe's guest room a month earlier, craving solitude to process everything without her well-meaning chatter. My phone rang and Nate's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button, before finally picking up. "I had lunch with my mother today," he said without preamble, his voice clipped but tinged with something unfamiliar. "She said something that's been bothering me." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral, curious but guarded. "She told me I should look closely at my father's life before following too closely in his footsteps," he said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice, a rare crack in his usual certainty, that what I've always seen as strength might actually be rigidity. I stayed silent, letting him continue. "It made me think about us," he said after a pause, "about the patterns you talked about. I'm not saying I agree with everything you said, but maybe there's something worth looking at." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was the first sign that Nate might be willing to question himself, to step back from the unyielding confidence that had defined him. "That sounds like a valuable reflection," I said carefully, choosing my words with care. "Would you be willing to meet?" he asked, his voice softer now. Not to negotiate or make decisions, but just to talk. Really talk, without strategies or ultimatums. I considered his request, searching for any hint of manipulation, but what I heard was something new. Uncertainty, vulnerability, a side of Nate I'd rarely seen. Yes, I said finally, I'd like that. As I hung up, I felt no illusions that one conversation would rewrite our history or erase the patterns etched into our marriage. Change, if it came, would be slow and hard-won. But for the first time, I faced the prospect of that conversation without the familiar weight of fear or the need to manage Nate's reactions. I had found my footing at Westridge, in my new independence, and in the quiet strength that had replaced years of self-doubt. Uncle Charlie's gift hadn't just been a company to run, it had been a spark, a catalyst for rediscovering the woman I'd buried under years of compromise. Whether my marriage survived this transformation was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would never again silence my voice or dim my light to keep someone else's world comfortable. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Seattle into twilight. I stayed on the balcony, savoring the calm confidence that had taken root inside me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings at Westridge, a conversation with Nate, and complications I couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time in years, I was ready to meet them as the woman Uncle Charlie had always seen, strong, capable, and unapologetically herself.